ballroom of that 5-star hotel was permeated with the sickly sweet scent of lilies and the muffled sound of polite conversation. But I tasted the bitter rise of bile in my throat. I had always been known for my firm posture, a genetic inheritance from my German grandparents who gave me height, broad shoulders, and a robust constitution that I had learned to love over time. However, that night, I felt small, shrinking inside my dark blue velvet dress, wishing to be invisible while I waited for my twin brother. Hayden and I had always been thick as thieves, two sides of the same coin, but in the last 2 weeks, he had transformed into a complete stranger to me. The invitation to our mutual friend's wedding clearly stated the ceremony time, but my brother, in his new phase of arrogance, decided to arrive only for the reception. I drummed my anxious fingers on the crystal water goblet, watching the main entrance with a growing dread that churned my stomach. Everyone there knew what had happened, for gossip spreads faster than wildfire in our local high society. Hayden had broken off a 3-year engagement abruptly and cruelly, trading an incredible woman for a fleeting fling he swore was the love of his life. I tried to counsel him, tried to make him see the madness he was committing, but he was blinded by ego and novelty. Now, I was there, alone, serving as an anticipated shield for the judgment that would fall upon him the moment he stepped foot in the hall. When the massive double wooden doors opened, the buzz of the room died almost instantly, replaced by an awkward and heavy silence. Hayden entered with that crooked smile that used to be charming, but now looked merely smug and devoid of any empathy. He was not alone, of course. Clinging to his arm like a shiny trophy was the woman with whom he had cheated on his ex-fiancée. She was stunning in an obvious and manufactured way, wearing a red dress that screamed for attention and a victorious smile that contrasted with the funereal mood of the room. I felt my face burn with shame, a redness that certainly stood out against my pale skin, betraying my discomfort to everyone looking at me for a reaction. I stood up from the table, smoothing the fabric of my dress over my wide hips, trying to recover the dignity my brother seemed determined to destroy. He walked toward me without noticing the looks of disapproval, acting as if he were the king of the world, completely oblivious to the emotional devastation his presence caused. His audacity to bring his mistress to an event where his ex-fiancée was also present was a level of cruelty I did not know he possessed. My eyes met his, and for the first time in 28 years, I did not see my reflection. I did not see the complicity that had always united us since the womb. I saw only a selfish man who believed his desires were above anyone else's feelings, including mine. He approached to greet me, but I took a subtle step back, crossing my arms over my chest in a physical and emotional barrier. His smile faltered for a second, a glitch in the mask of perfection, but he soon recovered and introduced his companion with offensive naturalness. The woman beside him looked me up and down, her eyes sweeping over my voluptuous body with a veiled contempt I knew too well. She murmured a dry greeting, making it clear that my presence bothered her as much as hers repulsed me. I merely nodded, unable to force a fake smile, feeling a cold, calculating anger take the place of the initial shame. I would not be an accomplice to this circus. I would not validate my brother's immature choices by smiling at the woman who helped destroy an almost formed family. I looked around and saw the whispers start up again, this time more voracious, fingers pointing discreetly and heads shaking in disapproval. Hayden seemed armored against reality, pulling out a chair for his new girlfriend and ordering champagne from the waiter, as if we were at an intimate celebration. He began talking about the traffic and how much her dress had cost, futile subjects that sounded like insults given the gravity of the situation. I looked at him and wondered where the sweet boy who shared snacks with me at school had gone, the man who promised to honor his commitments. The betrayal had happened only 2 weeks ago. The wounds were still open and bleeding, yet he acted as if it were a distant and overcome past. That lack of sensitivity hit me like a physical punch, making me question all the values our parents had taught us. I felt dirty by association, as if the blood we shared contaminated me with the same lack of character he was demonstrating that night. It was painful to realize that the person I loved most in the world had become someone I no longer respected. I took a deep breath, feeling the chilly air conditioning of the ballroom prickle the hair on my arms, but the cold I felt came from within, from a place deep in my soul. I needed to get out of there. I needed air. I needed to dissociate myself from the pathetic image my brother was projecting. But I could not leave, not yet, because I knew there was another person in that hall who was suffering much more than I was. My loyalty, which had always been blind regarding Hayden, began to shift direction in that exact moment, guided by a sense of justice that spoke louder than blood. I knew she was there, somewhere, hiding in the shadows to avoid the offensive glare of others' happiness and the toxic presence of my brother. His ex-fiancée, the woman I had learned to admire from a distance, whom I had called a sister-in-law, and who was now just a discarded victim. The simple idea that she was witnessing that grotesque spectacle made my heart clench in a way I could not explain. It wasn't just pity. It was a visceral female solidarity, an urgent need to protect someone who had been unjustly wounded. Hayden touched my arm, drawing my attention to a humorless joke his girlfriend had just told, expecting my laughter as validation. I looked at his hand on my arm, then into his eyes, and kept my face impassive, serious as a tombstone. His smile died slowly, replaced by an expression of confusion and irritation, as if I were the villain for not applauding his lack of awareness. In that instant, the invisible umbilical cord that still bound us snapped, and I felt strangely free and terribly alone. I excused myself dryly, saying I needed to use the restroom, and stood up without waiting for his answer or permission. I walked through the hall with firm steps, feeling the curious gazes burning my back, but I kept my head held high. I was not him. I did not agree with him, and I would make a point of demonstrating that, not with words, but with actions. As I moved away from the bridal table and my brother's toxic aura, my eyes searched anxiously for her, the only person at that party who really mattered to me now. I found Elena away from the center of the room, almost merged with the heavy velvet curtains that decorated the tall windows, as if she were trying to disappear into the very architecture of the place. She was alone, holding an untouched glass of wine with both hands, in a gesture that seemed more like a search for support than a desire to drink. My eyes, accustomed to looking for her in familiar crowds since my brother introduced her, instantly recognized the delicate curve of her shoulders. There was an aura of melancholy around her that contrasted violently with the upbeat music and artificial laughter filling the festive environment. Where once there was a vibrant woman full of life, now I saw only a shadow, a diminished and gray version of someone I deeply admired. Her posture, usually upright and proud, was slumped, as if the weight of public humiliation were physical and unbearable upon her slender back. I approached slowly, stopping at a safe distance to observe her without being noticed, allowing myself to absorb the painful beauty she emanated even in defeat. Her hair, black and straight as a starless night, fell in shiny cascades over the somber black dress she had chosen, perhaps in an unconscious attempt to mourn that relationship. Her skin had that warm olive tone, a heritage from her Turkish grandparents, which had always seemed exotic and fascinating to me compared to my rosy Germanic pallor. But that night, even the natural glow of her skin seemed to have been drained, leaving her looking pale and fragile, like a porcelain doll about to shatter on the marble floor. The features of Elena's face, always so striking and expressive, were tense, contorted in a visible effort not to break down in front of the city's elite. Her elegant aquiline nose and high cheekbones drew the profile of a dethroned queen, someone who lost her kingdom not through incompetence, but through betrayal. I could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way her fine fingers gripped the stem of the glass until her knuckles turned white. It was an image that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces, for I knew how much she valued dignity and discretion. Seeing such a strong woman reduced to that state of exposed nerves was the definitive proof of my brother's unforgivable cruelty. When she turned her face slightly toward the light of the chandelier, I could see her eyes, those immense honey-colored eyes, that used to laugh before her lips even did. They were too large, liquid, holding back tears she refused to let fall there, in front of the social vultures awaiting any sign of weakness. Her eye makeup was impeccable, but there was redness at the edges that betrayed recent crying, perhaps in the car, before working up the courage to enter that emotional slaughterhouse. Those eyes, which had so often looked at me with sisterly affection, now swept the room with mute terror, avoiding at all costs the table where Hayden was showing off. Her thinness scared me, for it seemed she had lost vital pounds in just those 2 weeks of personal hell since the breakup. The dress, though elegant, hung a little loose at the waist, evidencing how sadness was consuming her flesh and vitality. While I, with my large and soft body, always occupied too much space, Elena seemed to be shrinking, taking up less and less room in the world, as if apologizing for existing and being an inconvenience. This physical fragility awakened in me a fierce protective instinct, something ancestral and powerful, like a Valkyrie needing to defend something precious. I wanted to wrap that slender body in my strong arms, hide her from others' malice, and nourish her with affection until she shone again. The mental comparison with my brother's new girlfriend was inevitable and bitter, generating a wave of nausea in my churning stomach. While the other was an explosion of vulgar colors and loud laughter, Elena was a silent and deep poem, a beauty that required a soul to be understood. Hayden had traded the fascinating complexity of an ocean for the shallow superficiality of a plastic pool, and that enraged me. How could he not see the spectacular woman he was discarding? How could he prefer the fake shine of costume jewelry when he had a rare diamond in his hands? I noticed some guests passing by her and casting pitying glances, those condescending smiles that hurt more than a direct insult. They whispered right after passing, commenting on someone else's tragedy as if it were the night's entertainment, dissecting her pain with the coldness of sadistic surgeons. Elena felt every look, I knew she did, for she shrank a millimeter more with every forced interaction. She was there only out of social obligation, perhaps coerced by her own traditional family, who did not accept the scandal and demanded she keep up appearances. It was medieval torture disguised as a social event, and she was the martyr being burned in the public square. I smelled a familiar floral perfume, something like jasmine and roses, which wafted toward me when a breeze from the air conditioner passed by where she stood. That scent brought back memories of family dinners, of when she tried to include me in conversations while my brother monopolized the attention. Elena had always been kind to me, always complimented my clothes or my work, seeing the person behind Hayden's twin sister. Now, smelling that perfume mixed with the metallic scent of fear she exuded, I realized my feelings for her were much more complex than simple friendship or gratitude. Anger pulsed in my temples, hot and rhythmic, an indignation that pushed me further away from my blood and closer to her. I looked at Hayden on the other side of the room, laughing with his mouth full of hors d'oeuvres, and felt a deep disgust, a total disconnection from that man who had shared a womb with me. He did not deserve the tears accumulating in Elena's honey eyes. He did not deserve even a second of that extraordinary woman's suffering. I needed to do something. I couldn't just stand there watching the emotional massacre of someone who somehow seemed to be the only real person in that place. Elena took a deep breath, a trembling sigh that made her chest rise and fall irregularly, and placed the full glass on a nearby high table. She ran her hand across her forehead, a gesture of extreme exhaustion, and her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before quickly looking away. In that brief instant of visual connection, I saw a mute plea for help, an abyss of loneliness that sucked me into her pain without asking permission. She didn't recognize me as an ally, of course. To her, I was just an extension of him, part of the clan that hurt her, and that hurt me more than I expected. She adjusted the thin strap of her purse on her shoulder and turned, walking toward the corridor that led to the restrooms with the haste of someone about to lose control. Her walk, usually so graceful and floating, was fast and hard, a desperate flight to the only refuge where she could break down without an audience. I didn't think twice. I didn't consult etiquette or the consequences of abandoning the party at that crucial moment. My feet moved on their own, driven by a magnetic need to be where she was, to be the shield she didn't have. I followed the trail of the black dress and the jasmine perfume, leaving behind the noise, the music, and my old family loyalty. As I crossed the room, ignoring whoever called my name, I knew I was crossing a line of no return. I wasn't going after my ex-sister-in-law to fulfill a protocol of politeness. I was going after the woman who made my heart beat to a different and dangerous rhythm. I entered the quiet corridor, hearing the sound of her heels clicking on the cold floor, and took a deep breath, preparing myself for whatever fate had in store for the two of us behind that door. As I crossed the ballroom toward the restroom corridor, the buzz of conversation seemed to increase in volume, turning into a poisonous drone that penetrated my ears. They weren't just discreet whispers. They were moral sentences being pronounced by judges dressed in gala attire, holding champagne flutes like court gavels. I felt the gazes pinned to my back, heavy and accusatory, as if my shared genetics with Hayden made me an accomplice to that emotional barbarity he was starring in. Every step I took away from him felt like a silent declaration of independence, but the shame still burned my skin, a cursed inheritance I hadn't asked to receive. I heard fragments of loose sentences in the air, cruel comments about how the ex-fiancée should have had the dignity not to show up, or how my brother was a misunderstood stud. The hypocrisy of that social environment nauseated me, for those same people now distilling poison were the ones who smiled at Elena weeks ago, when she still wore the engagement ring. The judgment there wasn't about right or wrong, but about who held the power and audacity to impose their narrative, and Hayden was winning simply by not caring. I glanced back one last time, looking for some sign of remorse in his posture, some indication that the man with whom I shared a crib still existed in there. What I saw was a stranger wearing my brother's suit, laughing loudly at something his mistress whispered in his ear, completely oblivious to the destruction he left in his wake. He raised his glass in an imaginary toast, celebrating his own insensitivity, and that gesture was the final blow to my blind loyalty. At that moment, the invisible bond that always united us, that mystical connection said to exist between twins, snapped and broke silently inside my chest. I no longer felt his pain, nor his joy. I felt only an impassable abyss opening between my morality and his lack of character. The realization that my brother had become the villain of the story wasn't gradual. It was an electric shock that ran down my spine and put me on alert. I had always been the protector, the older and stronger sister who fought his fights on the school playground. But now I realized I was on the wrong side of the trench. Defending Hayden meant colluding with the humiliation of an innocent woman, and that was something my conscience, rigid and German, would never allow. I continued my walk, feeling the cold marble floor beneath my feet, contrasting with the suffocating heat of shame emanating from the tables around me. I passed a distant aunt who tried to grab my arm, probably to distill more poison or ask for explanations about the scandal, but I pulled away with unprecedented abruptness. I owed no explanations to anyone, least of all to that audience thirsty for blood and drama, who treated others' pain as weekend entertainment. My focus was entirely on the solitary figure who had disappeared down the hall, the only person whose opinion mattered to me on that fateful night. The image of Elena, shrinking and trembling, superimposed itself over any social etiquette or family obligation I might have. The corridor leading to the restrooms was a tunnel of silence and sobriety, an acoustic refuge far from the orchestra of futilities playing in the main hall. The lighting there was softer, crystal sconces casting long shadows on walls lined with silk wallpaper, creating an almost dreamlike and isolated atmosphere. The air seemed more breathable, free from the excess of mixed perfumes and the metallic smell of malice that permeated the party outside. I stopped for a moment, resting my forehead against the cold wall, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart echoing in my ears like war drums. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the rock Elena needed, not another source of chaos in her life. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. smelling the scent of cleanliness and lavender coming from the ladies' room, mixed with that floral trail Elena had left as she passed. The decision to enter there wasn't just a gesture of comfort. It was a transition, a step out of my brother's world and into hers. I knew that by crossing that door, I would be assuming a stance that could cost me my relationship with my family, but the alternative was unbearable. Leaving Elena to cry alone, believing no one cared about her, would be a cruelty greater than anything Hayden had done. Her loneliness screamed at me, even through the walls, a silent call that activated all my instincts of care and protection I didn't even know were so strong. I remembered all the times she was kind to me, the conversations about books and travel, the knowing looks we exchanged at boring Sunday dinners. I had always thought she was out of my brother's league, a sophisticated and deep woman trapped with a man who lived on the surface of things. Now, free from the bonds of the engagement, she seemed even more unattainable, and at the same time, desperately human and accessible in her pain. My feelings were a mess, a dangerous mixture of sisterly indignation and an attraction I kept locked under 7 keys in the basement of my subconscious. Going after her to console her was the perfect excuse, the noble justification I gave myself. But deep down, a voice whispered that I wanted to be near her. I wanted to be the person who would wipe her tears. I wanted to be the hand she would hold when the world collapsed. I wanted to occupy the space my brother left vacant with such negligence. This realization scared me, but it wasn't enough to stop my steps or make me turn back. I adjusted my dress, ran a hand through my blonde hair to ensure I didn't look like a disheveled madwoman, and breathed deeply once more, filling my lungs with courage. The sound of a muffled sob escaped from under the bathroom door, a sound so laden with sadness that it made my chest physically ache. There was no more time for hesitation or cold analysis of the social consequences of my impulsive attitude. Someone needed to go in there and tell her she wasn't the trash my brother made her feel like, that she was precious and seen. I placed my hand on the golden doorknob, feeling the cold metal against my sweaty palm, and turned it slowly, as if opening the door to a forbidden sanctuary. The noise of the latch giving way sounded loud in the silence of the corridor, marking the end of my neutrality and the beginning of a new alliance. I was entering that bathroom not as the traitor groom's sister, but as Harper, a woman about to discover that fate has twisted ways of writing love stories. I pushed the door and entered, leaving the judgment of the world outside, ready to face the emotional storm awaiting me on the inside. I found Elena leaning over the black marble sink, hands resting on the cold stone as if they were the only thing keeping her upright. The faucet water was running at full force, a continuous and loud sound she used to drown out the torn sobs shaking her narrow shoulders. Upon seeing me enter through the reflection of the immense mirror, she jumped, startled, turning off the water with an abrupt gesture and bringing her hands to her face to wipe the tears frantically. The panic in her eyes hurt me, for it was the look of a cornered prey expecting another attack, perhaps imagining I came to deliver my brother's final message or defend the dubious honor of our family. She tried to fix her hair and force an upright posture, mumbling disconnected excuses about allergies and something in her eye. Fragile lies that unraveled in the heavy air of the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, turning the key with a dry click that echoed in the sudden silence, isolating the two of us from the rest of the world and that damned party. I walked toward her without rushing, with soft steps so as not to scare her further, and stopped by her side, respectfully invading her personal space. I pulled tissues from the golden dispenser and held them out to her, without saying a word, offering only my solid and silent presence as an anchor. She looked at my hand, then at my face, and broke down again, accepting the tissue and covering her face while the crying returned with redoubled force, now free from the need to pretend. I let her cry, knowing those tears were poison that needed to get out, and instinctively placed my hand on her back, feeling the vibration of every sob through the fine fabric of her dress. We stood there before the mirror, and the image it returned was a fascinating and painful study of contrasts. Me, tall and broad, with my white skin and blonde hair in a tight bun, looked like a bodyguard, a Germanic wall built to withstand impacts. Beside me, Elena looked like a delicate Renaissance painting, with her olive skin, loose black hair, and that bone fragility that awakened an overwhelming tenderness in me. We were day and night, winter and summer, two completely different women united by the pain caused by the same man, but connected by something I still didn't dare name. When her crying subsided to trembling sighs, I began to speak, my voice coming out hoarse and low, charged with a sincerity I had kept for years. I told her she didn't need to apologize for anything, that the shame wasn't hers, but entirely my brother's, and that of the hypocritical audience outside. I spoke harshly about Hayden's blindness, about how he was a small man trying to fill an internal void with cheap trophies, incapable of handling a real woman. Elena lifted her face, surprised by the vehemence of my words, her swollen eyes staring at me with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, as if she had never expected to hear that coming from his twin sister. I turned to face her, leaning my hip against the sink, and held her cold hands between mine, which were warm and steady. The skin-to-skin contact sent an electric shock through my body, a current of recognition that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I looked deep into her honey eyes and said, with every letter, that Hayden was a fool for not realizing what he was losing. I said she was wonderful, intelligent, and possessed a natural elegance that no money in the world could buy. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, and my voice dropped to an intense whisper when I confessed what I really thought. I told her she was one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen in my life, a beauty that hurt because it was so perfect, and that anyone with an ounce of sanity would feel honored just to be in her presence. The compliment hung in the air, dense and charged, transforming the atmosphere of comfort into something palpable and electric. Elena stopped breathing for a second. Her lips parted, and I saw her pupils dilate, the focus shifting from sadness to my mouth. She didn't back away. On the contrary, she took a tiny step toward me, drawn by the gravity of this new feeling emerging from the rubble of the night. Her hand, previously passive in mine, squeezed my fingers tightly, seeking not just support, but confirmation that that moment was real. She whispered my name, not as a question, but as a prayer, and that sound was the trigger that brought down my last barrier of self-control. I brought my hand to her face, wiping a last tear with my thumb, feeling the softness of her skin under my rough touch. The kiss wasn't planned, but it felt inevitable, like the collision of two stars that had been orbiting each other for too long. Elena rose on her tiptoes, and I leaned my body forward, our lips meeting in a soft shock that quickly turned into urgency. It was a kiss that tasted of the salt of tears and red wine, a bittersweet flavor I would never forget. There was no hesitation, only a desperate hunger for comfort, for affection, to feel something other than the sharp pain of betrayal. She wrapped her arms around my neck, pulling me closer, pressing her thin body against my robustness, fitting into me as if I were the missing piece in her puzzle. I wrapped my arms around her waist, my large hands splayed on her back, protecting her, claiming her in that tiled space. The kiss deepened, tongues touching with an intimacy we shouldn't have had, but which felt like the most natural thing in the world. It was a kiss of high-level passion, as if one were draining the life from the other to survive the emotional shipwreck. The world outside disappeared completely. There was no party, no Hayden, no social judgment. There was only the heat of her mouth, the intoxicating scent of jasmine perfume mixed with my fabric softener, and the sound of our accelerated breathing echoing in the small bathroom. I felt powerful and vulnerable at the same time, dizzy with the discovery that the woman I secretly admired also desired me, or at least needed me with that voracious intensity. Every touch, every brush of lips, was a silent promise that I would take care of her, that I would make her forget all the evil my blood had caused her. Elena moaned softly against my mouth, sounds of relief and pleasure vibrating in my chest, giving me the certainty that I was doing the right thing, however crazy it might be. I felt her heart beating wildly against mine, in a frantic rhythm trying to make up for lost time. That cold, impersonal bathroom had become the setting of our private revolution, the place where the ex-sister-in-law and the groom's sister ceased to exist to make way for two women hungry for love. We pulled away just enough to breathe, foreheads touching, eyes closed, sharing the same air addicted to desire. My hand still held her waist possessively, and her hands were tangled in my hair, undoing the perfect bun I had taken hours to make. I opened my eyes slowly, seeing her flushed face, her lips swollen and moist from our kiss, and I knew in that instant there would be no turning back. I was completely, irrevocably lost in her, and I would face any army, including my own twin brother, to keep that expression of life on her face. The metallic sound of the doorknob being forced from the outside cut through the air like a gunshot, shattering the bubble of intimacy we had created in that bathroom. We pulled apart with a jump, panting and hearts racing, the fear of being discovered mixing with the adrenaline of what had just happened. Elena brought her hand to her swollen lips, eyes wide with shock, while I tried to regain my usual composure, smoothing my dress and taking a deep breath to calm the trembling in my hands. The door opened, revealing two young, giggling girls, party guests, who stopped laughing instantly upon noticing the electric tension hanging in the small room. They muttered an embarrassed apology and retreated to the stalls, giving us the perfect cue to escape that trap of marble and mirrors. I knew we couldn't stay there a second longer, for reality was about to fall on our heads with the weight of an anvil. I looked at Elena and saw she was about to panic, guilt and confusion threatening to extinguish the glow our kiss had lit in her eyes. I didn't give her time to think or retreat. My protective instinct took total command of my motor actions. I extended my hand to her, firm and decisive, a mute invitation to flee that circus of horrors my brother had set up in the main hall. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking at my open palm as if it were a lifebuoy in a shipwreck, and then gripped my fingers with desperate strength. We left the bathroom holding hands, but as soon as we stepped into the corridor, I shifted my grip to her arm, guiding her with the authority of someone clearing a path through a crowd. I felt her body tense against mine, but she didn't resist, letting herself be led by my certainty, blindly trusting my leadership. We crossed the ballroom like two ghosts on the run, ignoring waiters with trays of sweets and acquaintances trying to wave or strike up a conversation. My focus was fixed on the emergency exit or the main door, any place that would take us far from that stale air and Hayden's toxic presence. The loud music seemed like distant, annoying noise, unable to penetrate the dome of complicit silence enveloping us. Hayden saw us when we were almost at the door, and I noticed the exact moment he frowned, confused to see his sister and ex-fiancée leaving together in such a hurry. He made a move to get up from the table, perhaps to intercept us or make some tasteless joke for his audience, but I shot a look so icy in his direction that he froze. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of warning, a silent promise that if he dared to approach, I would cause a scene he would never forget. He retreated, turning his attention back to his wine glass, preferring the cowardice of comfort to confrontation with the sister he knew he had lost. That small victory gave me a taste of power, the certainty that I had chosen the right side of the trench. We crossed the glass doors, and the night air hit us like a balm, cold and clean, clearing our lungs of the social smoke and hypocrisy of the event. The valet ran to get my car, and while we waited on the sidewalk, I let go of Elena's arm, but remained close enough that our shoulders touched. She was shivering from cold or nervousness, hugging her own body, and I, in an automatic gesture, took off the stole covering my shoulders and placed it over hers. She looked at me in surprise, nestling into the fabric that still held my warmth, and a shy, grateful smile curved the corners of her mouth, illuminating the dark night. When my car arrived, I opened the door for her to get in, ignoring the protocol of waiting for the valet, wanting to ensure she was safe and protected as quickly as possible. I got into the driver's side, tossed my high heels into the back seat, and drove barefoot, feeling the pedals under my feet as a direct connection to the earth and reality. I peeled out, leaving behind the illuminated hotel and the old life we had until a few hours ago. The silence inside the vehicle was dense, loaded with unasked questions and a sexual tension vibrating in the air conditioning. Neither of us dared to turn on the radio. The sound of our breathing and the engine was the only soundtrack we needed. I drove without a set destination for a few minutes, just wanting to put miles between us and Hayden, until the route to my apartment became the only logical option. I lived alone in a quiet neighborhood, a personal sanctuary where the clutter of the outside world was not allowed to enter. I glanced at Elena in the passenger seat. She was looking out the window, watching the city pass by as a blur of lights, lost in thoughts I would pay to hear. Her hand rested in her lap, near the gear shift, and I had to fight the impulse to intertwine our fingers again, respecting her time to process the madness of that night. We entered my building's garage, and the silence changed quality, becoming more intimate and expectant as the world outside was left behind the automatic gates. I turned off the engine, and we sat in the dark for a moment, hearing the metal tick as it cooled, neither of us in a hurry to leave that safety capsule. Elena turned to me, the dim lighting of the garage casting mysterious shadows on her face, and whispered a thank you that carried the weight of a lifetime. I just nodded, unable to speak, feeling that any word would be too small to describe the whirlwind of emotions consuming me. We went up the service elevator to avoid curious neighbors, side by side, watching the floor numbers rising on a luminous digital panel. With each passing floor, the tension increased, the certainty that we were about to cross a definitive line solidifying in my stomach. When the door opened on my floor, the smell of my home, vanilla candles and old books, welcomed us like a familiar and safe hug. Elena entered first, hesitant, her eyes scanning the environment that was so different from the modern coldness of the house she almost shared with my brother. My apartment was warm, full of cushions, blankets, and plants, a reflection of my soul she was now truly getting to know. I locked the door with 2 turns of the key and slid the bolt, a symbolic gesture that the outside world was forbidden to enter and disturb us. Elena stood in the middle of the living room, looking a bit out of place in her party dress, but incredibly beautiful under the yellow light of the corner lamp. I took the keys from my hand and tossed them onto the sideboard, the metal-on-wood noise sounding like a gong announcing the start of the second act. I asked if she wanted something to drink, water or tea, trying to maintain domestic normality, but my voice cracked, betraying my nervousness. She turned to me, honey eyes shining with a new determination, and said she didn't want water, didn't want tea, and didn't want to talk about the past. She took a step toward me, closing the safe distance I tried to maintain, and her perfume invaded my nostrils again, intoxicating and dangerous. I understood the message. I understood that the escape wasn't just geographical, but an escape from rules, social roles, and expectations that imprisoned us. There, between those 4 walls, we were just 2 women who had discovered an overwhelming attraction at the most unlikely moment of their lives, and I was ready to explore every inch of this new territory, whatever the cost. The click of the latch on my bedroom door sounded like the starting gun for a race I had wanted to win for years, even without knowing it. The room was in twilight, illuminated only by the diffuse moonlight entering through the window and the reflections of the city outside, creating a scene of shadows and mystery. Elena stood in the center of the fluffy rug, her high heels already abandoned somewhere in the room, looking like an exotic nymph lost in my sanctuary of rest. I approached slowly, feeling the air become denser and more electric with every step, as if oxygen had been replaced by pure magnetic attraction. She didn't retreat. Her honey eyes, now free of tears, shone with a hunger mirroring mine, an urgency to erase bad memories with new sensations. When I touched her shoulders to help her unzip the dress, my hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from reverence for finally touching the forbidden. the black fabric slid down her slender body with a whisper of silk, revealing olive-toned skin that seemed to glow in the semi-darkness of the room. She shivered, perhaps from the cold or my touch, and turned to me, covering her chest with her arms in an instinctive protective gesture that lasted only a second. I held her wrists gently, moving her arms away and letting my eyes roam every inch of that beauty my brother was foolish enough to discard. She was perfect in her delicacy, with defined collarbones and a thin waist that my large hands could almost completely encircle. I felt like a giant next to her, a blonde, robust Valkyrie before a precious Ottoman princess. And for the first time in my life, my size didn't bother me. Elena took a step forward and began to unbutton my velvet dress, her fine, agile fingers working with a determination that left me breathless. When the heavy velvet fell to my feet, leaving me exposed in my light lingerie and abundant curves, I expected to see judgment or comparison in her eyes. But what I saw was pure adoration. She touched my wide hip with silent reverence, as if discovering a new and fascinating territory. The contrast between my pale, soft skin and her dark, firm skin was visually mesmerizing, a work of art made of flesh and desire. We fell onto the bed as if gravity had suddenly increased, our bodies colliding and fitting together in a tangle of sheets and limbs. The sensation of her cool skin against my excessive heat was a delicious thermal shock, sending waves of pleasure from my spine to the tips of my toes. I pulled her on top of me, wanting to feel her weight, wanting her to feel supported and safe upon my solid structure. She nestled into my neck, the scent of her floral perfume invading my senses, mixed now with the natural aroma of excitement and clean skin. The kiss that followed was different from the bathroom. There was no rush, no desperation, just a deep and slow exploration of tastes and textures. I wanted to memorize the taste of her mouth, wanted to map every sigh, every muffled moan she released against my skin. My hands wandered over her back, feeling her delicate spine, descending to the soft curve of her waist, claiming every piece of that body as mine. She responded with light scratches on my shoulders, her nails digging into my soft flesh, marking territory and pulling me closer, if that was even possible. There was a silent exchange happening there, far beyond the physical. I was giving her my strength, my stability, and she was giving me her vulnerability, her absolute trust. I kissed her neck, feeling the frantic pulse of her jugular vein, and whispered compliments I held in my throat, telling her how beautiful she was, how desired she was. With every word of mine, her body relaxed more, surrendering to the moment, forgetting the hotel humiliation, and focusing only on the present pleasure. It was healing through touch, a therapy where the couch was my bed, and the medicine was our repressed passion finally being released. Elena reversed positions with surprising agility, straddling me, her black hair falling like a curtain around our faces, creating a private world where only the two of us existed. She looked me in the eyes with an intensity that burned, and I saw there not the betrayed woman, but a woman owning her desires, rediscovering her power. She touched my face, tracing the contour of my jaw, and then ran her hand down my neck, over my breasts, exploring my geography with a curiosity that made me arch my back. I felt like the sexiest woman in the world under her gaze, my insecurities about my weight evaporating like mist in the sun. The intimacy deepened, becoming a dialogue of bodies meeting for the first time, but seeming made for each other. Her touch was precise and intuitive, knowing exactly where and how to make me lose control, while I used my strength to guide and protect her in every movement. The room was full of muffled sounds, ragged breathing, and the rustling of sheets, a symphony of pleasure drowning out any rational thought. I lost myself in her taste, in the softness of her skin, in the way she said my name as if it were a profane prayer in the middle of the night. In that moment, within four walls, we sealed a pact that needed no signatures or witnesses, only sweat and surrender. Hayden's betrayal seemed like something distant and irrelevant, a story told by someone else in another life. There, We were just Harper and Elena, discovering that love could be born in the most arid places and bloom in the darkness. The physical connection was the manifestation of something spiritual, as if our souls were intertwining, tying blind knots that would be impossible to untie in the future. When the climax came, it was like a summer storm, intense and overwhelming, leaving us trembling and clinging to each other like castaways on the beach. We lay there in the dark, hearing our hearts gradually slow down, silence returning to the room, but now charged with peace and complicity. I pulled the duvet to cover our sweaty bodies, wrapping Elena in my arms in a spooning position, feeling her back against my chest. She interlaced her fingers with mine, in a gesture of possession and affection, and sighed contentedly, a sound that warmed my heart more than any fireplace. I kissed her bare shoulder, smelling the scent of sex and love hanging in the air, and knew this wouldn't be an isolated night, wouldn't be just revenge or comfort. There was a silent promise floating in the room, a certainty that at dawn, we would still be there, together, ready to face the world. I looked at the ceiling, smiling in the dark, mentally thanking fate for turning the worst day of her life into the best day of ours. And so, we fell asleep, entangled in each other, unaware that the true test of our love was yet to come. The days that followed transformed my apartment into a timeless sanctuary, where the only ruling law was our desire to be together. The first thing we did was turn off our cell phones and bury them deep in a drawer, not out of fear of who might call, but because no notification from the outside world was worth more than a minute of our mutual attention. The electronic silence was liberating, allowing us to focus only on the sound of our voices, our laughter, and the soft music we left playing on the old record player. My brother's name and the party scandal became distant, faded memories, dust swept out of our existence, irrelevant before the vibrant color of the feeling growing between us. There was no ex-sister-in-law or twin sister. There were just two women discovering that together, they formed a perfect equation. We created a sweet, lazy routine, waking up only when the sun already warmed the sheets and drew shapes of light on the bedroom wall. I loved watching Elena in those first minutes of the morning, seeing how small and adorable she looked wearing my cotton t-shirts, which on her became short, provocative dresses. There was a deep intimacy in seeing her walk barefoot through my house, with disheveled hair and a sleepy smile, so different from the flawless, armored woman society knew. I felt immensely powerful and, at the same time, surrendered, realizing that this stunning woman was there for me, that she saw beauty in my strength and my large body, making me feel the most desired person on the planet. The kitchen became the stage for our sensory experiences, where cooking ceased to be a chore and became a ritual of seduction and care. I prepared dishes that filled the house with the smell of spices and comfort, and watched with satisfaction as Elena ate with real appetite, free from the shackles of diets and aesthetic pressures that surrounded her before. She praised my food by closing her eyes and moaning softly with pleasure, a sound that invariably made me drop the silverware to kiss her, tasting of wine and sauce. We fed each other not just with food, but with the certainty that there, in that space of ours, we could be whole, without masks, without judgments, just pleasure and acceptance. On rainy afternoons, we nestled on the wide living room sofa, legs intertwined under a knitted blanket, exchanging confidences we had never shared with anyone. Elena told me about her old dream of opening a flower shop, of living surrounded by the simplicity of plants, far from the coldness of offices and social events. I listened to every word mesmerized, stroking her hair, encouraging her to believe that life was possible, and that she deserved to be happy on her own terms. She, in turn, listened to my insecurities about the future and dissolved them with soft kisses on my face, stating with unshakable conviction that I was extraordinary and capable of anything. Our physical intimacy evolved into something transcending touch, becoming a conversation of souls through skin. We took long baths together, where hot water and steam created a private universe of lavender and affection. I washed her back with a soft sponge, caring for every inch of that body that seemed made to fit in my embrace. She reciprocated by washing my hair, her fingers massaging my scalp, with a tenderness that made me close my eyes and sigh, feeling cared for and loved in an unprecedented way. The visual contrast of our bodies in the steamy mirror, me robust and fair, her slender and dark, was no longer a cause for strangeness, but visual proof of our complementarity. There was a lightness in our coexistence that surprised me, as if we had been together for years and not just a few days. We discovered we had the same dry sense of humor, laughing until our stomachs hurt at silly things, creating inside jokes that only made sense in our little world. The feeling of being her soulmate was palpable. I knew what she wanted before she asked, and she completed my thoughts with a look. That apartment, once just my lonely refuge, now vibrated with the energy of the two of us, impregnated with our recent memories and the promise of a future we were beginning to mentally sketch. On the last night of that perfect week, we organized a gala dinner on the living room floor, by candlelight, wearing comfortable pajamas and toasting with the best wine from my rack. We didn't talk about the past, nor the people we left behind. Our toast was to us, to the present, and to the courage of having chosen each other. We made love right there, on the fluffy rug, with absolute surrender, exploring every nuance of the desire consuming us, celebrating the freedom of being together without guilt. It was a night of pure connection, where every kiss reaffirmed that this wasn't a passing fling, but the start of something solid and true. We fell asleep exhausted and happy, tangled in each other in bed, with her breathing beating warm on my neck, the most soothing sound I had ever heard. I felt complete, armored against any external malice, certain that nothing could shake the structure we had built in those days of isolation. Little did I know that, while we dreamed of our flowery, tranquil future, biology was working silently inside her body, preparing a twist that would test the strength of this newborn love. The peace of that dawn was sweet and deep, the last moment of calm before real life knocked on our door again. The milky brightness of dawn began to invade the room through the cracks in the curtain, announcing the end of our time bubble and the start of a gray Friday. I was in a light sleep, the kind where consciousness floats between dream and reality, feeling the heat of Elena's body glued to mine as the only anchor keeping me safe. Suddenly, I felt a sharp movement in the bed, a jolt that woke me instantly, followed by the sound of bare feet running across the wooden floor. I opened my eyes, confused and still dizzy with sleep, and saw only the sheet turned over beside me and the bathroom door ajar, from where came the unmistakable and distressing sound of someone getting sick. The protective instinct, which now seemed engraved in my DNA, triggered a red alert in my brain, making me jump out of bed without thinking twice. I ran to the bathroom, heart beating wildly in my chest, and found Elena kneeling before the toilet, her thin body shaking violently as she purged the little we had eaten the night before. The scene hit me like a punch. Her fragility, which in recent days had been replaced by laughter and passion, was back with full force, cruel and visceral. I knelt beside her on the cold floor, ignoring my bare knees against the ceramic, and held her black hair back, keeping the strands off her sweaty, pale face. My free hand rubbed her back in slow circles, trying to transmit some comfort, murmuring soft words of calm I didn't even know made sense. I felt powerless seeing her like that, wishing I could absorb that sickness into my own robust body, which seemed built to take any hit. When the convulsions finally stopped, she leaned back against the wall, exhausted and white as a sheet of paper, eyes closed and breathing short and wheezing. I got up quickly to wet a face towel in ice-cold water, wringing the fabric out hard before wiping her forehead and neck with all the care in the world. She shivered at the cold contact, opening her eyes slowly, and what I saw in them wasn't just the physical fatigue of someone who just threw up. There was a silent terror growing in her dilated pupils, an ancient and primal fear I couldn't decipher immediately. I helped her stand, serving as support so she could brush her teeth and get the bitter taste out of her mouth, keeping my arm around her waist the whole time, as if she would fall apart if I let go. I asked if it could have been the wine, or maybe the sauce from dinner, trying to find a logical, simple explanation for that sudden episode breaking our peace. She didn't answer immediately. She stood staring at her own reflection in the mirror, toothbrush suspended in the air, and an expression of frantic mental calculation. I saw her hand descend slowly to her flat belly, resting there with a frightening lightness, as if touching something sacred or terrible. The silence in the bathroom became deafening, heavier than any scream, charged with a tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up in anticipation of disaster. She dropped the brush in the sink with a dry clatter and turned to me, eyes swimming with tears that had nothing to do with the effort of vomiting. The color had completely vanished from her lips, and she seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 seconds, the weight of a crushing realization bowing her delicate shoulders. She whispered that her period was late, information she had ignored or attributed to the stress of the breakup and public humiliation of the last weeks. But there, in the coldness of that morning, with a churning stomach and sore breasts she had been hiding from me, biological mathematics became undeniable and cruel. I felt the floor disappear under my feet, my mind trying to process the information while my heart refused to accept reality's invasion of our utopia. We didn't need to say his name. The ghostly presence of my brother filled the tiny space between us, not as a person, but as an irreversible biological fact. Fate's irony was too bitter to swallow. Just now, when we had found and chosen each other, a physical trace of the past came to exact its price. Elena began to weep, a silent, desperate cry, covering her mouth with her hand, as if trying to hold back a scream of horror. I hugged her tightly, crushing her against my chest, trying to protect her from her own biology, feeling her body shake with dry, painful sobs. She repeated that it couldn't be true, that it was a punishment, that the universe was laughing at our attempt to be happy outside established rules. I stroked her head, kissing the top of her hair, promising everything would be okay, even without having the faintest idea how we would make that work. The pregnancy wasn't just a medical condition. It was an eternal link to the family we wanted to forget, a blood tie that would unite the three of us, me, her, and the absent donor, forever. She pulled away a little to look me in the eyes, searching for some sign of rejection or disgust, expecting me to abandon her right there before the complexity of the situation. But what she found in my gaze was a fierce determination, a flame that lit up the moment I realized her problem was now my problem too. I held her face between my hands and said firmly that we would face this together, that there was no I and you in that equation, only us. The pregnancy changed everything, yes, but it didn't change what I felt for her. In fact, it only solidified my position as the only person capable of standing by her side on this journey. Elena took a deep breath, trying to absorb my strength, and rested her forehead on my shoulder again, surrendering to the fact that her life had just done a 180-degree turn. The nausea passed, but the reality remained, heavy and concrete like an anchor holding us to the ground and preventing us from flying back to our romantic fantasy. We stayed there hugging on the bathroom floor, two women in love facing a trial by fire that would define the rest of our lives. The sun outside was already high, indifferent to our drama, illuminating a world that now seemed much more complicated and frightening than the night before. She lifted her face, eyes red and swollen, and said the phrase that would seal our fate with the gravity of a final sentence. Her voice came out trembling but clear, cutting the morning silence with the naked, raw truth that could no longer be ignored. She said she was pregnant, and that child was the only thing left of a life she didn't want anymore, but now would have to accept. I wiped a tear running down her cheek and kissed her forehead, sealing there a silent pact that child, regardless of origin, would be loved by both of us. The news hung in the air, transforming the apartment's atmosphere, dissipating the lightness of our week of passion and bringing an adult, serious gravity to our relationship. We were no longer just lovers fleeing reality. We were a family in formation, about to face the world's judgment and the challenges of an unexpected, complex motherhood. I looked at her belly, still flat and mysterious, and felt a mix of fear and reverence, knowing that there grew the reason for our future struggle and perhaps our future redemption. I got up and helped her to her feet, guiding her back to the bedroom. Not to make love, but to rest and plan the next steps of a war that hadn't even begun. I lay down beside her, holding her hand firmly, and we stared at the ceiling, two exhausted warriors before the battle. Part 1 of our story had just ended with a biological exclamation point, and Part 2 promised to be a journey of courage, acceptance, and a love that would have to be strong enough to rewrite every concept of family. The story of Harper and Elena continues soon. Subscribe so you don't miss the outcome of this exciting journey.